A truce has been declared in the US-China trade war.
Trade war is not over. The 90-day pause is allowing us to, take a step back from the brink, but the story isn't done.
As the tariff war deepened, nationalism in China surged. President Xi pledged more support for the tech sector.
人工智能这个事业也是跟我们中国是现代化强国建设。
In the US, lawsuits are ongoing between the top schools and the government.
I think Harvard's a disgrace.
Targeting universities in such a blanket way, they might be hurting themselves inadvertently in terms of the longer-term effort to make sure that the United States still dominates in all the critical technologies.
As the US and China continue to compete in tech, AI, and international diplomacy, how is the rivalry between superpowers impacting smaller nations?
Might makes right, and the big fish eat the little fish. For those little fish in the global south, that's a very distressing proposition. No one should assume that we'll have even just the 90 days of tranquility because Trump is nothing if not erratic and unpredictable.
China, first row. China, 67%.
In April, US tariffs on China dealt a severe blow to trade.
Foreign leaders have stolen our jobs. Foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories. They do it to us, and we do it to them.
China retaliated with duties of its own at 125% on US goods.
打，奉陪到底，谈，大门敞开。
China won't kneel down because we know.
China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs also released a video on the 29th of April entitled "Never Kneel Down." It went viral on Chinese social media.
Bowing to a bully is like drinking poison to quench thirst. It only deepens the crisis. All bullies are just paper tigers. The U.S. does not represent the entire world. Trade makes up less than a fifth of the world's total.
Then, on the 12th of May, the US and China agreed to slash those steep tariffs for at least 90 days. Under the temporary truce, the US will cut extra tariffs it imposed on Chinese imports from 145% to 30% for the next 3 months, while Chinese duties on US imports will be lowered from 125% to 10%.
When you look at what China actually offered, they didn't really pledge much. We're not seeing a structural change in the US-China relationship. We're not seeing increased market access by US firms in China. We're not seeing China offering any, at least public concessions. And so when we try and interpret what's happened here, this really seems to be the US blinking. The fact that the threat of empty shelves, higher inflation, economic disruption, that's what really pushed the US to the negotiating table.
China was successful in getting a dramatic rollback in the fairly preposterous levels of reciprocal tariffs, really in exchange for doing nothing other than agreeing to talk. So I think coming out of Geneva, I think China clearly has the upper hand.
China took a tough posture in the lead-up to the truce. And with trade talks slated to continue in the months ahead, many experts believe China will continue to take the same position. A window into President Xi's thinking can be found in the lead essay of the January 1st, 2025 issue of Qiu Shi, the official journal of the Chinese Communist Party. President Xi is quoted saying, "History has repeatedly proven that striving for security through struggle brings genuine security, while seeking security through weakness and concession ultimately leads to insecurity. This is precisely why I have repeatedly stressed the necessity of carrying forward the fighting spirit. In the face of blockades, containment, and suppression, we must have every reason to fight confidently."
We do know that even before the tariff wars, China's economy was facing some troubles. property sector downturn, local government debt, youth unemployment, and the stock market hasn't been doing so well in the last 2 years. So why do you think the Chinese are choosing to take this position?
The economic situation for the Chinese is not great. But once you come up against what the Trump administration is trying to do now, the sort of political dimension kicks in as well. And China, simply put, cannot afford to seem to be backing down under this pressure.
Why can't they afford that? Why can't they choose to take a more conciliatory tone?
You're talking about a country, a civilization, as they would like to remind us, that has risen out of a very difficult period in their history. In Chinese nationalist parlance, it's called the 100 Years of Humiliation, right? That occurred at the hands of the West, yeah? And China has overcome that. China has risen to greater heights today and recognized as a global power. And now they're up against what is seen to be a Western country that is trying to compel them, back down again through these measures. I think this is certainly something that triggers not just the leadership, the people as well.
There's definitely a much stronger feeling of being self-assured, self-confident. This idea that China also recognizes that it is no longer the same country in the 2020s as it has been over the past couple of decades. We are seeing a more assertive China.
One reason for China's confidence is that it believes it is a tech superpower. There are more Chinese papers published than American ones in the world's leading scientific journals. China is also well ahead of the United States in patent applications, an important measurement of innovation. The DeepSeek story is already well known, and AI is just one of the many fronts where China is fast advancing. As the trade war intensifies, President Xi visited AI companies in Shanghai, pledging policy support.
人工智能这些高新技术啊，是年轻的事业，对年轻人的事业。这个事业也是跟我们中国式现代化、强国建设、民族复兴、伟业都是连在一起。寄希望于你们。
This idea of almost like techno-nationalism, it's something that we can see is quite strong in China. I think there has been a little bit of what we can call a rally around the flag effect. This idea whereby people are going to come together and they're going to buy local or support China's champions, in the sense that in the context of U.S.-China competition, Chinese people want to make sure that they're supporting China. At the same time, I think from the consumption landscape and the consumption angle, the verdict is still out. We still have U.S. tech firms that are still very popular in the Chinese mainland. And even when it looks at the development of AI, that battle in dislodging, say, the US incumbents, that's still going to be an uphill battle for many Chinese firms. But that's where the sentiment is.
What we've seen with DeepSeek is that China can make AI just as well as Western models and at a cheaper price. And now the plan is to export this to global markets. So do you think American companies should really brace themselves for intense competition?
I think they should. These days, we are seeing genuine innovation. We are seeing Chinese companies emerging in sectors, not just AI, but also renewable technology, electric vehicles, that are posing, again, genuine challenges to firms in the West that have dominated the globe for decades and decades. I think that should be causing firms to wake up. The fact that China in the 2020s is no longer China of the 2010s. The big caveat, however, is that you have aspects of the supply chain that China is still reliant on the West for. So specifically, upstream components of the semiconductor supply chain, whereby chip manufacturing equipment, semiconductor design software, these are still areas that the US and other US-aligned countries have a chokehold on. Until China is able to break that chokehold, this dominance is still going to have a bit of a ceiling.
Some elements of the policy community and the Trump administration are locked into sort of stereotypical views of China that have been outdated. for 10 years, 15 years, if not longer. This whole idea that Chinese innovation just is a result of sort of intellectual property theft and things like that, that's no longer the case. If you talk to multinational corporations active in China and they talk about the China market, many of them will talk about needing to be in China because of the R&D and because of the innovation that's taking place there.
Chinese innovation is on vivid display in its robotics industry. According to Chinese government data, as of July 2024, China holds over 190,000 valid patents related to robotics, accounting for about 2/3 of the global total.
中国每年的机器人产业的市场份额的增长量上，都已经连续10年出现了2位数的增长啊，每年都是10%、15%、20%、30%的增长，所以这就使得机器人行业在中国呀，每3年左右就会翻一番。
China has many competitive leading robotics companies, some of which they acquired, like KUKA in Germany several years ago, but also ASEAN, which is a Chinese robotics company. And if you go inside a battery EV or advanced manufacturing plant in China, you're just going to see a lot of automation, a lot of industrial robotics. Obviously, China didn't lead in those technologies. Those were first invented by Japan, parts of Europe, Germany, and Korea, but where China's really excelled is driving down the cost of those industrial robots.
The use of robotics in advanced manufacturing in China is already widespread. But what's new and grabbing attention are humanoid robots powered by artificial intelligence. These are robots that look and move like humans and could eventually perform tasks just like us, or even better. And then there are the robots that can perform intricate tasks. According to Unitree Robotics, its G1 robot, which was launched in 2024, can move at 2 meters per second, has hands that can maneuver objects delicately, knees that work better than humans, and an AI system that learns and upgrades itself continuously. The Navigator 2 by the Zhejiang Humanoid Robot Innovation Center, launched in August 2024, can work in factories, play chess, and be your babysitter.
机器人，你知道外太空有多少个星球吗？
我们银河系大概有4000亿颗恒星。
Another area of innovation, drones. China has been using drones to deliver blood to hospitals.
测算了最远的距离，从血站到我们的最远的院区，大概在17分钟，非常高效地做了一个危重症抢救和治疗的一个保障吧。
Farmers have been using drones to harvest fruits. And the forestry department uses them to plant trees.
这个无人机最大标重在150斤左右，像咱这个树苗子就是吊个7克到8克左右，最远距离就是个300米到400米，一个来回就是个1分钟左右。
And then there are China's spectacular drone shows, like this one in Shenzhen City in southern China. Drone technology is also critical for military applications. In contrast, US drone maker Skydio saw a hit to their business when China restricted battery sales to the company in 2024. Writing on the company website, the company CEO said, "As a result of the sanctions, our battery supply will be reduced for the next few months, which will impact our customers." This is a clarifying moment for the drone industry. If there was ever any doubt, this action makes clear that the Chinese government will use supply chains as a weapon to advance their interests over ours.
过去的6年，美国发动的对中国的科技战，已经可以宣告是失败的。 美国用一个超级大国之力去碾压一家公司华为，现在看来也是失败的，连一个公司都没法打压，那美国怎么可能够打压成功中国的科技发展呢？
Global media outlets reported that in 2024, Huawei's revenue surged to a near record high. In April 2025, the Wall Street Journal also reported that Huawei has developed new AI chips, which the company hopes can replace some higher-end products of US chip giant NVIDIA.
With the tariffs, there's been a surge of nationalism in China, particularly amongst those people working in the science and tech sectors. How do you think this will impact China's position in the negotiations with the US?
China is in a situation now where it cannot be seen as being weak, caving in to American pressure, standing down. Certainly not given the poetic way that the American president sometimes likes to cast the issue. So it is perfectly understandable. But at the same time, because of that, it makes finding a resolution more difficult, right? I mean, when you drum up the sentiments of the people, when patriotism starts to take hold and starts to take over the narrative, take over the discussions or the mood around it, it just makes it very difficult for compromises to be made.
If you sort of take a deep breath and take a step back, almost all of the specific points of friction that we see between the United States and China in recent years, if not more than a decade, are really the result of underlying systemic conflicts. These issues are not going to be resolved in 90 days. So anything that comes out of the upcoming discussions and negotiations will be, by definition, just sort of a superficial quick fix, and it's inevitable that the frictions and the tensions will flare up again in the not too distant future.
And given what we've seen from the Trump presidency so far, there's also a possibility that within these 90 days, that there could be a trade war again.
Well, this is exactly right. I mean, I'd remind everyone that President Trump firmly believes that unpredictability is his greatest asset. He feels that he thrives under conditions of chaos. So when the rest of the world is running around with their hair set on fire, Trump believes that's to his advantage. So no one should breathe a sigh of relief. No one should assume that we'll have even just the 90 days of tranquility, because Trump is nothing if not erratic and unpredictable.
The US has some of the top universities in the world. But the Trump administration is waging a war on some of these schools.
I think Harvard's a disgrace. I think what they did was a disgrace. They're obviously anti-Semitic.
In April 2025, the Trump administration moved to freeze $2.3 billion in federal grant funding to Harvard over alleged race-based discrimination. Harvard filed a lawsuit to halt the freeze. The university said it would defy Trump's administration's demands to limit activism on campus and make changes to its admissions policies. Over in Columbia University in New York, students protested against what they say are broad attacks on higher education, including funding cuts, the expulsion of international students, and the stifling of free speech about the war in Gaza.
No KKK, no fascist USA! No cops! No KKK, no fascist USA! No cops!
I would want to say one thing, though, about targeting universities in particular, and targeting it in such a blanket way, right? Withholding funding for universities and things like that. We all know of the United States as the technological powerhouse of the 20th century. It is is it going to be the technological powerhouse, bar none, of the 21st century? We don't know. But a lot of it is going to depend on the very good work that American universities have been producing in terms of R&D in various aspects of the technological enterprise. Yeah. But the administration is going after that, in a sense, right? And, I don't know whether it's a case of them shooting themselves in the foot, cutting the nose to spite the face or whatever, but they might be hurting themselves inadvertently in terms of the longer term effort to make sure that the United States still dominates in all the critical technologies.
Chinese netizens created AI-generated videos of America's supposed cultural revolution.
意气风发斗志昂扬，换主席领导我们的马达，是要美国再次伟大。向前进，向前进。
I think use of the term cultural revolution is probably a bit of an overstretch, but certainly it's clear that the Trump administration has been very methodical in trying to influence U.S. institutions, both within the federal bureaucracy and beyond it, to ensure that people that share some of the same philosophies of the Trump administration are in positions of authority. This is new. This is new in American history. For instance, when I started my career in the U.S. government as a trade negotiator, there was long-standing professional staff that did not change. Republicans, Democratic administrations came and went, but you relied on a cadre of career professionals to run these institutions. The Trump administration has really tried to upset the apple cart on those traditions.
Amidst the upheaval happening at the universities, China sees opportunity. In recent weeks, there have been many news headlines of STEM experts who are leaving the United States for China. One such STEM expert is Li Qiaohong, who started his company Microclear after completing his PhD in the United States.
My other job is to build some big telescope to observe the star, the moon, is very far away from the Earth, right? So, and then when I transfer to US, I have to change my field from astronomy to ophthalmology. And my boss in US gave me this offer, and he told me, you have very good background in astronomy, in optical system design, in how to image, then I think you can handle the job for ophthalmology. So this is then I transferred to ophthalmology device.
A decade ago, most of the high technology devices for ophthalmology came from Japan, Europe, or the USA. Li and his team wanted to change that.
So in this field, you have to work hard. Okay, you cannot work only 8 hours one day. No, for my Microclear team, we worked almost over 12 hours every day. So I mean, you have to work hard. You have to try your best because you have to make something crazy. You have to make something happen. You have to make something amazing.
The team believes they have achieved that goal.
我觉得从相机跟造影的角度来讲，所有眼科检查的第一步，我们叫眼底一张照，疾病早知道，对吧？那所有的检查都会去拍眼底照相，意味着我们拍的每一张照片，它的有效成功率都是100%。那对于 AI 读片也好，对于获取成像的这个快捷性也好，对所有的操作的这个医院客户来讲的话，那它提高了它的整个的这个操作效率、检查效率，在有限的时间里面可以检查更多的患者。 那从 AI 读片的角度来讲，我们这种单机版的 AI， 我们可以读19个病种。对于目前整个行业来讲，我刚才说的这几项技术都是变革性的创新技术。那这个变革性的创新技术呢，它把我们整个的一个产品对于整个行业的影响，成为了这个行业的领头羊。所以我们在国内呢，推出不到3年的时间里面，我们在造影的领域，我们的市占率呢已经做到了第1。我们在照相领域，我们逐步在替换过去的所有的光学相机，这是未来3到5年不可逆的这样的一个趋势。我们也会成为未来国内的这种超广角激光相机的这样的一个领航者。
We started our overseas sales in 2022. So far, we have been exported to 37 countries.
Across China, there are many examples of returning talents like Li and his team who are building new companies. Returning professionals are one reason why China is making big strides in technological innovation. While the US cuts university funding, China ramped up investments on research and development and higher education. In 2024, China's R&D expenditures hit 3.61 trillion yuan, an 8.3% year-on-year increase, according to official data cited by a Dalian University report. Besides generous research funding support, startups can also tap on state subsidies to commercialize their research findings. And then there are other factors like cheaper labor, better transport infrastructure, and AI, leading to a competitive advantage across many industries. China dominates global manufacturing, accounting for over 30% of global manufacturing output.
The US says they want to bring manufacturing back again through tariffs.
Yeah.
Do you think they will succeed?
Actually, it's quite bizarre, right? Because you have China talking about the advanced technologies of the future and wanting to invest heavily in that. And then you have the United States that almost seems to want to bring back labor-intensive early 20th century manufacturing, to the country. And here you're talking about a country that even to today is seen as the leader in many of these technologies that the Chinese are trying to build up. So personally, I find it a bit odd. Yeah.
To execute this type of sort of economic revolution that the Trump administration aspires to would really require multi-billion-dollar investments on the part of private companies. And given how erratic, how changeable the trade policies, the tariff policies, and the economic policies have been, I'm not sure how many companies are going to be willing to take that gamble. Even if you're able to get over that hurdle, you've got other problems, or even at least question marks about the U.S. Workforce. Does the U.S. workforce, can the U.S. workforce supply the sufficiently skilled labor? There's question marks about that. And we've already seen that issue arise in the context of the CHIPS Act and some of the semiconductor production facilities that were intended to move into the United States have already signaled that they're going to have labor force shortages, or at least difficulty in finding skilled labor.
That TSMC example that you brought out is really a good case in point, because TSMC's factory in Arizona has just been announcing delays after delays in the last few years for various reasons. So even if America wanted to bring back manufacturing, the time that it's going to take to make this a possibility, seems like it's going to be a really big challenge. And by the time it happens, Trump might no longer be president.
Well, exactly right. And from the perspective of the companies having to write those checks and make those investments, how do you do economic planning when the policy environment can change so rapidly? So I'm skeptical, to put it mildly.
In the United States, you actually can also see lots of dilapidated infrastructure, bridges, highways, railways, airports, etc. There are lots of problems. These are not created by foreign countries. Therefore, one point of discussion with friends in the United States is that if you really want to enhance and increase your manufacturing capabilities, do something that China has been doing so well. Build up your highway connectivity, railway connectivity, build more high-performance airports, for example, and improve the working quality of your people, the ethics of work, commitment to work, and also create the pro-business environment. And I think greater international cooperation will really help the United States to deal with these real problems in the United States.
Coal has had a dirty reputation for quite some time. When burnt, coal releases more carbon dioxide than oil or gas, so it's by far the most harmful fuel for the climate. In many parts of the world, countries are trying to transition away from coal energy. Not America.
Today we're taking historic action to help American workers, miners, families, and consumers. We're ending Joe Biden's war on beautiful, clean coal once and for all, and it wasn't just Biden, it was Obama, and there were others, but we're doing the exact opposite. And all those plants that have been closed are going to be opened. If they're modern enough, or they'll be ripped down and brand new ones will be built. We're going to put the miners back to work. We will rapidly expedite leases for coal mining on federal lands to turbocharge coal mining in America.
Trump, who has called climate change a hoax, campaigned on a pledge to, quote, drill baby drill. The New York Times reported that the Trump administration wants to block thousands of megawatts of planned wind projects that could power homes and businesses. President Trump talks about strengthening American manufacturing, but plans to withdraw assistance from the electric vehicle industry, which has invested billions of dollars in new factories across the United States.
In the short term, if you're going to roll back a whole variety of potentially costly environmental regulations and procedures, pump up the, drill baby drill, as members of the administration frequently like to say, you might actually in the short term end up boosting growth somewhat. But if you accept, as most mainstream scientists do, that over the long term, there's no alternative other than to make this green transition, then over the long term, I think the costs are going to be substantial.
China, meanwhile, is powering ahead in its green energy exports. Companies like Huawei and Xiaomi, who used to manufacture phones and other tech gadgets, have moved into the EV space, joining industry leaders like BYD in creating an unrivaled EV supply chain, and prompting automakers across Europe and the United States to cut jobs to stay competitive. China's solar industry is also powering ahead. Across rural China, in even the most remote parts of the country, solar panels could be seen to dot the landscape. In China's cities, solar panels are also spread across rooftops, and they're even on building facades. China installed a record 217 gigawatts of solar panels in 2023. That's more than what the US has ever built in its entire history, and more than in any other country.
How much of a lift do you think that the green tech sector can give to the Chinese economy in these troubled times?
Most other countries in the world, or at least most other major economies in the world, have accepted the inevitability of this green transition, and you simply can't get around the fact that in sector after sector, China is in a predominant position. And I was a little bit surprised at the frankness of a Japanese minister several months ago who came out and publicly stated, point blank, Japan cannot make the green transition without China, which I thought was a rather stunning admission.
Clean energy contributed a record 10% of China's GDP in 2024, according to European think tank, the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. With sales and investments worth 13.6 trillion yuan, the sector has now overtaken real estate sales in value.
Despite the fact that China's green exports have been rising, one thing is that a lot of these companies are not as profitable as we think they might be. There's intense price competition amongst the Chinese EV companies. There's also been almost cutthroat competition between the solar companies. So in that context, how much optimism can we express in hoping that the green tech sector will help China during these tariff wars?
Cautious optimism. I mean, I think anything that allows China to move away from its traditional drivers of growth, say in sectors like steel, glass, cement, things that are allowing Chinese production to move up the value chain and incorporate higher levels of technology into their production processes. These are all things that ideally, theoretically, will allow the Chinese economy to mature and to develop in ways that kind of bridge that gap between a developing market and a developed market. All that being said, the price wars in the Chinese market should not be underestimated. And there's a big risk that these price trends could very easily bleed out, not into the wider Asian region, but the entire global marketplace. And so these are things that are going to put caps on this potential growth that we can see in China.
March 7, 2025. China's foreign minister uses his annual press briefing to speak about the importance of the global south.
全球南方经济总量全球占比超过了40%，对世界经济增长的贡献率达到了80%，已经成为维护世界和平的关键力量。世界百年大变局下，东西南北关系出现此消彼长的历史性变化。
A month later, Trump announces Liberation Day, slapping high tariffs on many global South countries.
We've enjoyed an 8-decade period of a rules-based global trade system in which trade relationships have been built on mutual respect and mutual benefit. Trump is now taking us back to much more of a law of the jungle environment. Might makes right, and the big fish eat the little fish. For those little fish in the global south, that's a very distressing proposition.
Within days of President Trump's tariff announcements, Chinese President Xi Jinping makes a trip to Vietnam. President Xi called on Vietnam to jointly oppose unilateral bullying and uphold the stability of the global free trade system. China and Vietnam signed 45 different cooperation agreements during President Xi's visit, across areas like infrastructure, AI, trade, clean energy, and the digital economy. After Vietnam, President Xi visited Malaysia.
面对当前国际秩序和经济全球化遭受冲击，两国将同地区国家团结一致，共同抵御地缘政治和阵营对抗暗流。
At a time when multilateralism is under tremendous strain, When some nations abandon the principles of shared responsibility and others question long-standing commitments, China's global initiative offers a new lease on hope. They look outward, not inward. They speak not of rivalry, but of renewal.
President Xi's final stop in Southeast Asia was Cambodia.
这些国家呢，确实面临着一个复杂的外部环境，特别是美国的压力。这个时候，他们都希望中国怎么想，中国是什么立场，那么中国会怎么做？那么这次正好是一个加强战略沟通的非常好的机会，在最高领导人层面上达成了共识，那就是我们要团结在一起，来对这种开倒车的行为说 say no， 说不。
For the United States to use tariff as an instrument to throw a wedge into the economic development of Vietnam and other ASEAN member states is the wrongful thing to do. And it will really cause a lot of bad will among the people in this part of the world against the US government. And eventually, I would say, the US government will realize that they lose more than whatever they can gain. And ironically, I would say, it will push the realization of the goal of moving more manufacturing jobs back to the United States more and more remote. Why? Because many international, multinational companies or other international companies will not be very happy about such ups and downs and unpredictable and uncertain government policies dealing with international trade.
During a BRICS meeting which involved 11 countries on April 28, the Trump trade war dominated discussions.
Over the last decade, US and China has been vying for influence globally. And there are, of course, many opinions about who's on top. But for some people, and I would say a substantial amount of people, Washington, D.C. has an image of being a beacon on the hill with certain democratic ideals. Do you think that view still holds?
Well, look, the Trump administration has certainly been taking a sledgehammer to those old perceptions about the United States being that beacon, that city on the hill that Ronald Reagan first invoked. So I think there's been a tremendous amount of reputational damage. Now, China's been working hard to try to capitalize on that and position itself to sort of lead the opposition, the pushback against the United States' recklessness. I think China will achieve some successes on that front, but don't forget there are still a number of significant antagonisms between, certainly within ASEAN and China and elsewhere in the world. So the picture will be a little bit more nuanced than some might think.
Given that the U.S. Has historically criticized other countries for adherence to rule of law, for issues around corruption and governance and administrative transparency, and then now the current administration is doing everything that the U.S. has previously criticized, there's a question of credibility. It's not necessarily just a Trump factor. When we talk to people out in Asia or Europe, there's a lot of consternation that Trump was reelected. This points to pretty significant fissures in the American political landscape, illustrating that, there's a wide swath of the American electorate that not only supports what he's doing, but wants to see more of it. And I think this is very much undermining a lot of America's global image and raising a question about how the country is going to look.
2 days after the Geneva meeting, where China and the U.S. announced a truce in the trade war, President Xi hosted leaders and officials from Latin America and the Caribbean countries in Beijing.
关税战、贸易战没有赢家，霸凌霸道只会孤立自身。中方愿同拉方携手启动5大工程。 为支持拉美和加勒比国家发展，中方将向拉方提供660亿元人民币信贷资金额度。
Now, we know that negotiations are ongoing between different countries and the United States. And there have been media reports that the Trump administration is asking some of these countries to reduce their links with China in exchange for tariff exemptions. How do you view that?
Yeah, that puts a lot of countries in a difficult position, right? Because, for a long time, many countries, certainly Singapore, but many other countries have been talking about this. We don't want to choose sides, don't make us choose, right? Not just small countries, big countries, the Japans and Germanys of the world as well, right? Unfortunately, the climate today seems to convey this impression that both the US and China are turning the screws as far as this issue of choice is concerned. I don't believe that any country, as difficult as it is, are going to choose a side. Yeah? In fact, now comes a time where countries have to sort of walk the talk, right? You got to now demonstrate how it is that you're not going to be caught up in this great power competition. And I think there are a number of ways that countries can and will do that, right? Foremost being working among themselves, but also using existing mechanisms, right? For us in Southeast Asia, you've got the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, you've got the CPTPP, but it's not easy, it's not straightforward. Difficult, but this is the environment and landscape that we find ourselves on.